Okay, so I want to go back to our data set, not this data set. I want to look at tech diversity. In fact, let's open, well, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to open tech diversity from yesterday. And I'm going to save it. Instead of copying it over, I'm just going to save it into today. So now we have a copy of the exact same thing. Now remember, and I'm pretty sure I have the CSV file in for today's lecture. Let's make sure I have today's CSV file. So I have the Pi file I just saved. I have the CSV file. I'm going to go ahead and open it because we're going to look at it in a second. Now back to idle for a second. So remember, we did this yesterday, right? We have tech diversity equals get diversity data directly from our CSV library. We imported our CSV file, our tech diversity. It filled in the data. And remember, what did it fill in the data as? And just to make sure I get this correct, because that's a long one. Remember, it squeezed it. But it starts with a curly brace, and all curly braces are dictionaries. So it starts with a dictionary. And then it has a company name. And then it has another dictionary. And then a company name as a key and another dictionary. So it is a dictionary of dictionaries. And you can see that it has one key and then a dictionary related to all the data from that company. And if we look at our data set, and let's expand everything. We look at our data set, we have a company. This ends up being our keys, right? And then we have all these categories up here. And we have data for each category for each specific company. So we have all that data for these 25 tech companies. So let's write a function that gives us a list of all of these companies. I want a list of all of these companies. So what should we write here? Let's actually put that in here. Let's see, define get all companies. I don't need a parameter. The data set is already a global variable. We don't have to pass that in. It's going to return a list of all the companies, so we don't need to specify a specific company. It's just going to return everything, so we don't need any parameters. But if I want access to all the companies, what should we write here? So think about it for about 30 seconds and think, how do I access all the companies? Right, remember, in fact, let me show you the dictionary. Remember, we have this dictionary thing going on right here. So I have one response in private, but how can I extract all these values from the dictionary to get the names of the companies? Remember, I have a dictionary. That's what this is. This is a dictionary. How do I get the names from it? So type in chat and let's take a look at it. So I have one version. Anybody else have a suggestion? There's more than one way to do this, as usual. But there's two obvious answers that we've used in this class. Anybody else? I know you're awake. I saw the poll questions. Interesting. Okay. You didn't write the code, but that's okay. That's a good suggestion. That's all right. So first one, I'm going to grab both of these. And someone just gave another one of the same suggestion of the first student. So this is the code they gave me. And actually I got that in there twice. So we'll try, that's not 100% ready yet, obviously. And then the other student who didn't provide me any code but gave a suggestion is for loop to get keys. Two pretty good suggestions. Let's do the first one. And just to make sure we know we have two in here. Now we have two files, or two questions. Let's do the first one. This isn't quite ready. First up, we have to return it. But it's going to return the keys, and the companies are the keys. However, remember, this, and actually, let's go ahead and run it. This isn't going to give you what you want specifically. Oops, let me fix. The reason it's not going to give you what you want is because it returns this dict keys thing, this dictionary keys thing, which means we have to convert this to a list. So by converting it to a list, now we're going to get a list of all the companies. So it was a good suggestion, it just wasn't quite there yet. It needs a little refinement. But that is probably a better way, and probably the easiest way to write this, but it's not the only way to write it. I want to do the loop version too. So the loop version, we define some list that's empty. There's nothing in it. And then we loop through the data set, diversity data. And remember, what is going to be in the company? That's going to be the key. And the key is going to be the company name. So we're just going to append it directly to our empty list. And then when we're done, we just return the list. So the loop method also works. And it isn't significantly harder, but if you don't really remember, so let's actually do that one's the first one. And there's the second one. We get the same answers. Two different versions of doing the same thing, same output. They both work. And they're both really good suggestions. I was going to do both of them regardless of what students suggested, so we cover the two things I wanted to do. Are there other ways of doing it? Probably. But these are definitely the easiest ways. And that's one of the things that we know about in programming, is that there really is no one way to get the correct answer for just about anything. As you get more experience with methods in Python and in programming in general, you learn how to do different implementations, and you might remember, oh, there's this keys method in here that I can use, or I might just want to do a loop method for my own reasons. You might find that some things are more efficient or simpler to write than others. Simplicity is always a good idea, strictly from the idea that simpler tends to be less complicated and tends to have less bugs. But we can't always rely on simplicity. Okay, let's write a new function. I want to do the same thing, but instead of companies, I want to get all the categories. I want all the categories from this data set. Categories. Remember, categories. I want this data. So I want to be able to return that list of all the categories. And remember, our tech diversity dumped all of this. So here's NVIDIA. And there's all the categories I want. Hispanic, white, black, Asian, total female, women of color, white women, white female, I mean, Asian female, black female, all of it. I want all of that. I just want a list of those categories. But I don't know how to get it yet, right? I don't see an obvious thing. Like this one's pretty easy and this one's pretty easy, but how do I get the categories? So how do I get that list of names in these categories? In fact, let me leave it on the data set, which by the way is terrible. Let me simplify this for you because that's a lot of data to stare at. Remember, that's what NVIDIA looks like. And I have one of those for every single company. So think about it for a minute. So think about the structure. We have a dictionary of dictionaries. Remember, this is the same dictionary. That's one thing out of this whole dictionary. So how do I get these categories? So take a minute, and if you know how to get the categories, just kind of paste it in chat, and we'll take a look at it in a minute. Oh, that might work. That's a little crazy. It's so crazy it might work though. All right, any other suggestions? I have a crazy one that I'm willing to try. Nested for loop. Okay. All right, let's take a look. So first one, which I deemed crazy, is that. And the second one, which is actually similar, but was nested for loop. And let's see, now I actually have another one. And let's see, this one had, so let's talk about this last one, only because this actually wouldn't really work. Remember, tech diversity in data is a dictionary, not a list. And so that's actually an invalid key. You could do something like NVIDIA, and that would work, right? You could do that. So that's one. Two, and then return list. And that could work, but there's a problem with it. There's a problem with this. What happens if we delete NVIDIA? What happens if we delete this out of the data set, or we get a new data set of with the same columns, but different companies? If NVIDIA is not in there, this is going to break. So that could potentially be a problem, but it might work. Let me actually, all of these are going to crash if I run this without putting that in there, and it crashed anyway. Let's see. Where's my, oh, weird characters because of the copy paste from chat. And it's still, oh, my fault. Had it too far over. So let's do number 2. And it did work. But then if I delete NVIDIA, we're in trouble. So I wouldn't recommend this because this is not generic. So I would say not general enough. So let's look at these other 2 suggestions. I like the nested for loop. There's a way we can do something with that. Let's check this one out. This one looks interesting. Let's see, data.items, grabbing the items. And I think the thing here is we need to return that. And let me think about it. You're going to get an item. I probably wouldn't call that I would probably call item, just to make my brain stop hurting a little bit. And then we want bracket 1. What is bracket 1 going to give us? Dot keys. So items returns key value pair. 0 is the key itself, which is the company name, and 1 would be the other dictionary, and then we're getting the keys. That's interesting. Let's actually run that. That's a very interesting way of doing it. Actually worked. So that's an An interesting way of doing it. I didn't even think about trying that one. That really does work. So that's one way of doing it. I like the nested for loop idea. It could work. It actually would work, but you wouldn't have to really, you would have to just like this one here, you would just return after the first line or something. I'm going to show you another version. So that would work if you wrote it correctly, but let me show you a version that also works. Remember, we just wrote a method to get all the companies. In fact, I'm writing this out when I should just copy paste it. If I have a list of all the companies, which isn't really too different from nested for loop, then I could just get the first company in here. And then I'm just going to return a list of tech diversity data for this first company using the keys. It's not too dissimilar to this one here, except I'm just getting the company list first. And if I run that, it should work. But it still has a problem. Really, it's kind of a rare problem, but there's still a problem in here. Let me see the problem. It's the same problem with this one here. This one here asks for a specific key. Now, this is a list. But the problem here is, what if we have an empty file that only has the columns and no rows? This bracket 0 would cause an issue. So we really should check the length first before we go and do this. And if it happens to be 0, just to keep it cleaner. And now, regardless, will actually not crash on us. These are the kinds of little edge cases that we should know about. What is this? Is 1. Just in case something really strange happens, we get the same data set. So all 3 of these return the same data set. And then this nested for loop one, do I have time for it? I guess I have time for it. Let's do the nested for loop, because there's an interesting way you can write the nested for loop. Let's see, let's make that 2. Let's make that 3. So think about the nested for loop. What would that look like? For, let's see, company in it's actually keys. Let's just do keys. It is going to be the company name, but let's just do keys. Let's actually do key. So we get the first one, and then we just return the list of tech diversity for that key. So it's really a combination. It's this thing here, except now we're just getting the first key. It's going to run one time and stop. But just like here, it has a potential problem. Is what if the loop doesn't run because there's nothing in there? Well, if the data set is empty, then the loop's not going to run. We still want to return something. Let's see if that one worked. See if I did that correctly. Yep, same answers. All right, so we have 4 different ways of doing the same thing. Just this one is the risky one because that data might not be there. But these other 3 all work. Okay, so now we have all of these functions, or we're just going to use the top ones, both of these, or potentially both of these. I want you to think about this now. So we're going to write a function to plot our data. So given a name of a company and a list of categories. So given a name of a company and a list of categories, I want to do a bar chart. So we're going to plot a representation of all of these categories for a single company. So the company is fixed, but the categories could change on us. We can have many different categories. So for each and every category, we should figure out the values that we're going to plot. and the percentage values for each one of those categories of people. So we'll start with an empty list. And then we have to loop through this category. So category in categories. And now what do we need to do? Well, we can access the tech diversity data for this company, because this has the data that we need. If the company name is NVIDIA, then I want all of NVIDIA's data. Or if I looked at this data set here, if I wanted NVIDIA, I want all of NVIDIA's category. I want it, but it's specific categories. It's not all categories. It's some categories, potentially one category to all categories. We don't even know which ones. So within that company, we can get the value for a particular category by passing in this category. Remember, it's key. So this right here returns a dictionary of categories. Now we get a value at that particular category. So we're getting a particular value for a category for this particular company. And now we just need to append it to our list, because we're just making a list of values. Remember, our chart needed a list of values, a list of categories, and a list of values. Well, the categories are given to us. Now we're generating a list of values. And now that we've collected the values we're interested in, now we want to plot the bar chart. And so we need a list for the x-axis, which we have. It's the categories. We need the values for the x-axis elements, or the y values. That's going to be this values things here. We have enough to plot a bar chart. Except I don't have that. I don't have my import statement. So let's go, and let's just write one here. So import matplotlib.pyplot, and then this time I'm going to use a different alias. I'm just going to use the plot alias instead of PLT, just to show you that you can use any one you want. You just have to be consistent. So that's why I'm using plot here. And it takes the x-axis, which is our categories, and the y-axis, which is our values. Now, remember the process of incremental coding? We actually haven't checked to see if our values works yet. So let's make sure we're getting, one, the categories that are being passed in, and two, let's make sure we're getting the proper values for those categories. So let's just confirm our data works before we start creating, and let's name my function. So just before we start creating the chart, let's just check our data. And I want to do a small subset. I don't want to do everybody. Let's do Cisco, Hispanic, Asian, Black, and white. Not all of them. And so Hispanic, Asian, Black, and white printed out. And then we have these numbers. So 5.1, 36, 0, 34, 542. If we look for Cisco, Hispanic is 5.1, which is what we got. Asian, we said 36. Asian is 36. Black is 3.4. Black is 3.4. And then white, 54.2. Let's find white, 54.2. So the data is there and it's accurate. So we did get the categories we asked for. Categories we asked for are there, and we got the values for each one of those categories in the same order. So everything matches. So now we can actually print our bar chart, and I'll leave the print statements in there. And remember, we have to show our bar chart. And so now we run it and run the method, and there's our chart. Hispanic, can't really see it, but that's 5.1-ish. Asian is in the 36 range. Black is smaller than Hispanic. And then the white is over here in the 50s range. So we have all of our data now being displayed. And we could take this and say, well, let's look at another company. That worked for Cisco. Let's try Google. So here's the chart for Google. Hispanic, Asian, Black, and white. Pretty similar, actually. Or what if instead of just these 4 categories, I want to show all categories? Let's go back to Cisco. I want to show all categories, not these 4. So I want to do all of them. So how do I do that? How can I include all columns right here instead of without typing them all in? I don't want to write anymore. I'm tired of typing this all in. I want to use a function. Don't I have a function already that does that without copying and pasting? We do. We wrote it already. We actually wrote it 4 times. Define all categories. So if I get rid of this, I type define all categories. And now I got this chart. Unfortunately, the x-axis is messed up because some of these things are really long in here. But you can see for Cisco now, all the categories. And there's options, by the way, to change this data down here to be either horizontal like it is now. You can make it vertical. You can make it at a 45-degree angle. So there are options to fix this if you really wanted to fix that kind of stuff. So let's actually, I'm not going to fix that specifically, but I do want to add our labels. Our X label, category of people. Y label, percentage of people. Title, diversity of people at, well, remember, we were looking at a specific company, so we can concatenate that company name there, and we'll get diversity of people at a specific company. And now when we run it, now we have our label. Diversity, there's our title for Cisco, our category of people, our percentage of people. And you could do this again for Google. Now it says at Google, and it's giving us the Google information. So we can actually see that data there with those labels.